The morning sun spilled gently through the glass walls of the Silver Heights Park, a place where the city's elite often brought their children to play. Ethan Carter, the youngest self-made CEO in the state, was sitting on a wooden bench, his laptop open, eyes darting between business graphs and quarterly reports. His life was a perfect picture to anyone who saw it from the outside. A stunning mansion, luxury cars, a loyal team, and a baby girl who was the light of his life. But inside, behind the success, lay a wound that time had not yet healed. His wife, Amelia, had passed away 2 years ago during childbirth, leaving him alone with their newborn daughter, Lily. Since that day, Ethan had buried himself in work, thinking that money and control could silence grief. That morning, as he lifted his eyes to check on Lily, who was toddling around the park with her tiny pink shoes, his heart skipped a beat. His daughter was standing near a woman sitting on the edge of the sandbox. The woman looked fragile, her clothes worn and faded, her hands rough as though life had been unkind. But there was something oddly gentle about her. The way she smiled at Lily, the way her eyes softened as the little girl handed her a flower. Ethan frowned, uneasy, wondering how this stranger had entered a park filled mostly with nannies and caretakers from wealthy homes. But then, something in the scene made him pause. The woman's face. There was a faint familiarity he couldn't place, a flicker of memory hidden behind those tired eyes. He stood up and walked toward them, his polished shoes crunching the gravel. When the woman noticed him, she immediately looked down, almost in shame, as if she didn't belong there. But Lily tugged at her father's sleeve, giggling, "Daddy, she likes flowers." Ethan smiled faintly, ready to thank the woman politely and walk away, but before he could speak, she whispered something that made the world around him still. "I used to be your wife's nurse." Her voice trembled with emotion, and in that moment, Ethan froze. His breath caught. For a second, the park, the sunlight, the sounds of laughter, all faded into silence. He stared at her, his mind racing. He hadn't heard those words in years. Amelia's nurse? That couldn't be. Amelia's nurse had disappeared mysteriously after the delivery, vanishing without a trace. He had searched, not out of anger, but confusion. She had cared for Amelia during her pregnancy and had been by her side the night she died. But after that night, she was gone. No message, no goodbye, just gone. And now here she was, sitting on the ground, talking to his daughter like fate had written this meeting long ago. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of fate, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will remind you how deeply life can connect strangers in ways we can't always explain. Ethan's voice came out lower than he expected as he asked her name. "Grace," she said quietly. Her eyes met his, tired yet filled with a pain that felt almost familiar. She explained she hadn't meant to intrude. She had recognized Lily from a distance, recognized her mother's eyes. "She looks just like Amelia," Grace murmured, her voice breaking. Ethan swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to walk away, to avoid reopening a wound that had taken 2 years to scar over. But another part, the part that still dreamed of his wife every night, wanted to know more. They sat on a nearby bench as Grace began to speak. Her story unfolded slowly, every word trembling with guilt and sorrow. She told him she had been Amelia's private nurse during the last months of pregnancy. Amelia had been delicate, battling complications that doctors warned could be dangerous. But she had been brave, too brave, Grace said, refusing to terminate the pregnancy despite the risks, because she wanted to give Ethan a child. She said Lily was her miracle, Grace whispered, eyes glistening. She said she'd rather live 1 year loving her baby than 100 years without her. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered those words. Amelia had said something similar to him, laughing softly when he'd begged her to rest more. "Some things," she had said, "are worth the pain." Grace's hands trembled as she continued. The night Amelia went into labor, the power had gone out in the hospital's old wing. The machines had failed for a few minutes. "I tried to save her," Grace said, tears sliding down her face. "I held her hand. I called for help. But by the time the doctors came, it was too late." Her voice cracked into silence. I blamed myself, Mr. Carter. I thought if I had done something faster, if I hadn't panicked, maybe she would have lived. I couldn't face you. I couldn't face anyone. So I ran. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not hatred, but a raw ache of understanding. He had spent so long searching for answers, for someone to blame, when maybe there was no one to blame at all. He looked at Grace, this woman who had carried her guilt like a shadow, and saw not a failure but another victim of that tragic night. Grace explained she had lost her job soon after, unable to work again in hospitals. The guilt had eaten her alive. Her husband had left her, her health had declined, and she had been living in a small shelter for months. I didn't come here to ask for help, she said softly. I just saw Lily playing, and for a second it felt like I saw Amelia's smile again. I just wanted to say hello. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The park suddenly felt too bright, too loud. His daughter was sitting a few feet away, building sandcastles, laughing at the sky, a sound Amelia never got to hear. And this woman, this broken stranger, had once held Amelia's hand as she left the world. He stood up slowly, his heart heavy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan took out his wallet and held out a card. Grace shook her head immediately. No, she whispered. I don't want money. I only wanted forgiveness. He didn't say a word. Instead, he bent down beside her, his voice low. Then take this as a second chance. Come to my office tomorrow. Not for money, for a job. If Amelia were here, she'd want that. Tears streamed down Grace's face. She covered her mouth, nodding silently. It was the first kindness she had been shown in years. Ethan walked back to his daughter, holding her tiny hand, his mind filled with memories he thought he had buried forever. The next day, Grace arrived at the Carter Foundation, a non-profit division Ethan had created in Amelia's memory, but had rarely visited himself. When she stepped inside, the staff greeted her warmly. Ethan had arranged for her to work there as a caretaker for children in need, a role she was perfect for. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Grace began to heal. She found purpose again in helping children who reminded her of Lily. Ethan began visiting the foundation more often, watching Grace interact with the kids, her warmth returning bit by bit. Sometimes, he'd catch her whispering little things to Lily when they visited together. Stories about Amelia, about how brave she had been, how she loved flowers and laughter. Lily, too young to understand everything, simply smiled and called Grace her angel nurse. But healing wasn't instant. Ethan had nights when he still blamed himself, when the weight of loneliness pressed too hard. Yet every time he saw Grace playing with Lily, or saw the light return to her eyes, he felt something deeper, a sense that Amelia's love was still around them, guiding their steps toward redemption. One afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the glass towers of the city, Ethan stood in the foundation's garden with Grace. The air smelled faintly of roses, Amelia's favorite flower. Grace placed a small bouquet on a memorial stone dedicated to her. I used to talk to her, even after she was gone, Grace said softly. I used to ask her if she'd ever forgive me. I think she just did, through you. Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes moist. She believed in kindness, he said quietly, and in second chances. I think she'd be proud that we both found ours. The two stood there in silence, the golden light washing over them. In that moment, there was no CEO, no poor woman, no guilt or power, just two broken souls who had found healing in the same memory of love. And as Lily came running toward them, her laughter echoing through the garden, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He finally understood that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about learning to live again despite it. Life had brought Grace back not to remind him of loss, but to remind him of mercy. As the camera would fade on their silhouettes, Ethan lifting his daughter into his arms, Grace smiling softly beside them, a quiet narration would echo in the background. Sometimes the people who reappear in our lives aren't there by accident. They're there to show us that healing begins where forgiveness blooms. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel, because kindness and compassion are the only gifts that never lose their worth.